Welcome to another episode of Forgotten Heroes on the Grilly Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for Forgotten Heroes, Mike Goodpaster, and today we're going to talk about number 37, former running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, Joe Delany. Now, Joe Delany was probably no doubt, was more of a hero off of the field than he was on it, but he was a great football player on it. He was born in 1958 in Beausejour Parish in northwest Louisiana. He was discouraged by his father from pursuing his dreams of playing football. Delany still became the starting wide receiver by his junior year at Halton. Major Division I schools that scouted him included Grambling State, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana State. Delany ended up playing for Division I AA's Northwestern State Demons from 1977 to 1980. After telling his coach of his willingness to do anything to play football at the collegiate level, Delany switched to the running back position. He went on to be an All-American selection in 1979 and 1980 while at Northwestern State. He met his future wife, Carolyn, and they had 2 children by his senior year. On October 28, 1978, Delany carried the ball 28 times and gained 299 yards against Nicholls State. Now, 263 of that yards came in the second half. Delany's rushing stats in the second half of the game are still an NCAA record. In the same game, he scored 4 touchdowns, one of which was a 90-yard run as he led his team, Northwestern State, to a victory over Nicholls State, 28-18. Delany finished his career at Northwestern State with over 3,000 yards rushing, 31 touchdowns. In 1988, his senior year, he was ranked 8th in the nation in all-purpose yards. And on November 22, 1980, he played his last game at Northwestern State, and the school retired his jersey right then and there, number 44. Delany would go on to be elected to the College Football Hall of Fame in 1997. Now, Delany was selected in the second round of the 1981 draft by the Kansas City Chiefs. UPI named him Rookie of the Year of the American Football Conference in the 1981 season as he rushed for over 1,100 yards, set 4 club records, and averaged 80 yards per game. Delany's effort helped propel the Chiefs to a 9-7 record, just missing the playoffs. It was the team's first winning season since 1973. In his rookie season, he was selected to the Pro Bowl after setting Chiefs records for most yards in a season, most yards in a game, 193 versus Houston, and most consecutive 100-yard games. After coming off the bench to record 101 rushing yards in his initial NFL action in New England, he ran for 106 and registered 104 receiving yards in his first professional start against Oakland. Now, a strike by NFL players and an eye injury limited Delany's playing time in the 1982 NFL season. He underwent surgery to repair a detached retina and only registered 300 yards rushing in the 8-game shortened season. Now, Delany had a lifelong history of helping others, and once paid for the funeral of a former teacher whose family could not afford a proper service. Then on June 29, 1983, Joe Delany, who was living in nearby Ruston, went with friends to Critters Creek, an amusement park center at Chenault Park in Monroe, Louisiana. While reportedly discouraging swimming children from venturing too far out into a pond, Delany dove in to save 3 children who were screaming for help, floundering in a water hole left by recent construction work. The water hole, which covered 2 acres and was 6 foot deep, was not intended for swimming, but to add to the park's aesthetics. Despite his inability to swim, Delany nevertheless selflessly tried to rescue those children. Now, 1 child managed to get out of the water without harm, and another was taken to an emergency room where he later died. Police recovered the body of Delany and the remaining child. The amusement park has since been closed to the public. Now, Delany's name is commemorated at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City's Ring of Honor. And Ronald Reagan, July 15th, wrote these words about Delany during his funeral. He made the ultimate sacrifice by placing the lives of 3 children above regard for his own safety. By the supreme example of courage and compassion, this brilliantly gifted young man left a spiritual legacy for fellow Americans. For the 1983 NFL season, the Chiefs honored Delany by wearing a circular patch bearing a gold eagle and the number 37 on the upper left chest of their uniforms. Houghton High School also named the park Joe Delany Park in his memory. The NCAA posthumously awarded Delany the 1984 NCAA Award of Valor. Louisiana Governor David Treen presented the Louisiana State Civilian Bravery Award to Delany's family following his death. Now, there's more to this story. Joanna Delany was 3 months old that horrific day when her father Joe, a man who could barely swim, reflexively darted into a pond for the sake of saving drowning children and died trying. Because of her age at the time of his death in 1983, the youngest of his three girls, the one who the family calls JoJo, has no specific memory of her father. But the late great chief, whose name resonates between mystical and mythical, is alive within her. Well, my father's my hero, she said a few months back with her sister Crystal and mother Carolyn, who served as a drum honoree before the Chiefs played the 49ers in a preseason game at Arrowhead Stadium a couple of years back. Now, most of all, she is proud to hear the stories of the generous soul her father was, and proud to be his daughter, and proud to think of him having died the way he lived his life, trying to help others. So proud that along with her mothers and sisters, Tamika and Crystal, she is intent on forever honoring the legacy of her father. That helps explain why she has written 2 children's books about Joe the Great, a Caped Crusader who, along with his dog King, saved the day and in a non-violent way protects children from bullies. The books, which she hopes to have illustrated and published, are inspired by the spirit of her father, with some help from his faithful childhood dog King. Now, this is a true story too, but at Houghton High School, Carolyn Delany, Joe's wife, said the big white dog had enough black spots to resemble a Dalmatian. He often ran alongside Joe as he broke down the sidelines for touchdowns. The PA announcer would say, "Joe Delany and his dog King just scored a touchdown." And once again, that's a true story. I've had multiple people verify this to me. And that's why the family trademarked his name itself, in a part of fending off others appropriating it for their own purposes and pockets, including a group that initially applied it last year to an unauthorized Joe Delany's friends and family at the park he drowned at in Monroe, Louisiana. Now, it's also why they started the Delany 37 Foundation. In the early stages, few years in, as they constantly set aside getting everything in order, the mission ahead will include promoting water safety, which has already begun with free swimming lessons, mentorship, leadership development, and financial literacy. In time, Joanna said, she'd like to add a specific focus on girls who have lost their fathers. So it seems no coincidence to me that all 3 of Delany's daughters are in the medical field. Tamika, the eldest, is a dialysis technician. Crystal, who is said to walk and talk like Joe, is a registered nurse. And Joanna is a medical coder and lab technician. They're all about helping others, just like their father was. And you got to think that even though the ones that knew him, probably none of them remember him, but they have the heart of their father. And that heart doubtless was part of the pulse at Arrowhead Stadium a couple years back when 13 members of the Delany family arrived in a rented minivan to attend the first game since 2004 when he was elected into the Ring of Honor. Now, while his number 37 jersey hasn't been retired, 37 years after he played his last game, it has never been worn by another Chief. His example is so essential, his aura so enduring and in so many poignant ways, I don't think anybody could wear it. Now, when they honored Joe Delany in 2004, they were driving down the street to Arrowhead Stadium, and Delany's daughters looked at a sign that some people were carrying. It bared the image of Joe and the infant daughter the niece had named after him in the words "gone but not forgotten," our tribute to the legend, Delany Nicole. Now, the father's name was Mark Leith, Mark Neath. And they were moved by Mark Neath's tears when they stopped at the side of the street and gave him a hug. And they were truck anew after reading of Delany Neath wearing number 37 in sports to honor her namesake and in her expressed interest in becoming a veterinarian. Now, when they came back, more than a decade later, they enjoyed another touching connection with the Neaths as they met up with the Delany family again, and the Neaths got to introduce their now grown-up daughter to them. And this story and the impact of his life just continues to surge on. Years after he found the 37 Forever Foundation that, before dissolving, worked to provide swimming lessons for inner city children in Kansas City, thoughts of Joe's selfless sacrifice still make Phil Cloyster emotional. Now, at least in a way to honor what Mary Jo Clyer, who founded the KC Swim Academy in 1984, she grants free swim lessons to children who wouldn't ever otherwise have access. It is in contact with the Delany family constantly to further the cause. And now, while Clara works with swimmers from 6 months to 3 years old, the club's swim team also teaches young swimmers. She also has spoken with other local organizations interested in doing the same and has a goal to get in with the Kansas City public schools. Clara said in an email, "It's all a memory of Joe. I try to save lives through education. It is important to have role models like Joe Delany." Quincy Gardner, who's president of Bossier City Optimist Club, is in regular contact with the Delanys, seeking to find the right ways to contribute to the foundation. Those things that Joe Delany stands for are in the Optimist Club, creed, he said. Now, Delany echoes in the life of a man by the name of Harry Strudna, formerly a neighbor in apartments across the street from the Truman Sports Complex. Then a late teen, Strudna considered Delany a role model and best friend. He still cherishes playing DJ for Delany and his friends over one New Year's Eve, and that he was entrusted on game days with Delany's beloved Mercury Cougar. Speaking of Delany and his cars, in 1985, Kevin Peterson of Blue Springs, Louisiana, bought a 1981 Mazda RX-7. A year or so later, he pulled out an item from the pocket in the driver's visor. A note landed on his lap. He unfolded it to find Joe Delany's name and telephone number on it. He said it was an eerie feeling, knowing what had happened to Joe and realizing that vehicle must have been owned by someone that knew him during his short time in Kansas City. Anytime I see Joe Delany's name in print, I think back to that time and how selfless Joe was in trying to save those boys, knowing he lacked the ability to swim. Delany's story, of course, is at least piercing as it is stirring. Now, when you look back at the life of Joe Delany, the impact he had on people is still felt today. And it's felt even by people that didn't know him. Now, outside of the family, few knew him better than Marvin Dearman, who was the police diver who tried to save Delany's life. Even as the Delanys embrace him, and Carolyn considers him part of the family for what he tried to do, he's a man that, has reiterated that the memory of that day in trying to save Joe still haunts him. Then there's the complicated matter of Lamarcus Holland, who was then 10, and he was saved, even as Joe and his brother and cousin drowned. Holland told the Star newspaper in 2008 that guilt about what happened had made him self-destructive. He spent time in prison, but at least it straightened out his life, the last Carolyn heard from him years ago. This much is true, though. In this great tragedy, Joe Delany's family found a calling. To spread the word, spread the gospel of Joe the Great, you might say. The man whose tombstone says, "Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for another." The man who returned to Houghton in his NFL offseason and paid electric bills for people with limited means, and mowed lawns and bought groceries for the elderly, and took neighborhood kids out for haircuts. That legacy now is also 6 grandchildren and and a great-grandchild, including Joanna's 12-year-old son, Jaden. His first word was ball, and he watches all the video of his grandfather he could find on YouTube. He stands just like my father, Joanne said, noting his hands on his hips. He also has a certain penchant for breaking outside on the field, a trait that sometimes brings tears to her eyes as she remembers Joe hugging the sideline with his faithful dog King streaking alongside. Joe the Great, indeed. He lived up to what I heard, giving his life for others, Joanne said. And I want others to know, to be an example to others, to help others. If you see your neighbor in need, help your neighbor. As Joanne knows too well, you didn't have to remember him then to know that. Just remember him now. So guys, that's our Forgotten Heroes for today. Joe Delany was a great running back. Without this tragic accident, maybe he'd be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But when you look at his life, maybe he should be there anyways. But today, that's it for Forgotten Heroes. Make sure you check us out. We will be back tomorrow with a Forgotten Heroes episode or an On This Day. So, follow us at The Grueling Truth on Twitter, and you can hear our podcast wherever you find sports podcast. So for now, this has been Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.